Good evening. Ooh. Hello, my name is Colin Weil. I am the Executive Director of B'nai Jeshurun, and on behalf of the rabbis and clergy in the B'nai Jeshurun community, we are thrilled to host this Attorney General's Forum this evening. Welcome. B'nai Jeshurun is a nearly 200-year-old community. We have been part of the fabric of New York since 1825. The sanctuary you're sitting in tonight celebrates its 100th anniversary this year. And BJ, for a very long time, has taken its role in civic life very seriously. We have hosted in this space Eleanor Roosevelt, Martin Luther King, Abraham Joshua Heschel, many leaders of civil rights and social justice movements throughout the decades, and we're thrilled to continue that work. This past year, we had a program called Faith and Public Life, American Democracy, Jewish Responsibility. And through that lens, we explored the role of Jewish values in communal life and in civic life and in politics. And that work continues. And tonight is a great example of that. We're grateful for Ellen Landesberger, a BJ member who brought this project to us today. Thank you, Ellen. And it is now my pleasure to welcome Josh Daniel from Indivisible Harlem, the conveners of tonight's event. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Hi! This is amazing. If you had told me in November of 2016 that hundreds of people would be crowded in a room excited about state politics and any of these amazing women on this stage being our next state attorney general, I would have said you're insane, but here we are. Yeah, we're so excited to host this event. Shout out to our amazing co-sponsors. Indivisible, We Stand, Upper West Side. Yeah. Action Potluck. West Harlem Progressive Democrats. Inwood Indivisible, and Uptown Community Democrats. You guys are all incredible. So excited that you're here. Just a little bit about us. We're a grassroots group of people who got off the sidelines in 2016 because we didn't know what else to do, and sort of a coalition of doers that I feel really lucky to be a part of. If you want to get involved, we need everybody in this fight, and if everybody did one thing, imagine what an amazing world we live in. With that, I think just silence your cell phones, out of respect for, the synagogue and everything. I think that's it. And with that, without further ado, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Eleanor Tatum, the editor and publisher-in-chief of the Amsterdam News.
Thank you, Sondheim. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having us here tonight. Thank you to Indivisible Harlem, and thank you, Ellen, for asking me to be a part of this evening. And welcome to all of you. We have three phenomenal women up here with us this evening who are going to discuss the issues that are affecting this state, and we are going to have, hopefully, what is going to be a wonderful discussion about these issues that will help to inform us about the future of what this state can, should, and will be. So we have Leisha Eve, Tish James, and Zephyr Teachout. We will start with an opening statement from each of them, which will be about 3 minutes long. And then after that, we will be taking questions that all of you have filled out, well, if you have chosen to, have filled out cards that were given to you when you came in. If you haven't gotten one, please go up to the front of the room or the back of the room, since now you're sitting, but towards the entrance, and get a card and fill it out, and you can pass it to this gentleman right over here who is collecting them and going through them and handing them up to me, and we will get to as many questions from the audience as we possibly can in our limited time frame. So with no further ado, we're going to start with Leisha Eve for her 3-minute opening. Leisha.
Great, and I hope it's okay for me to stand up, and is my mic on? It is? It is? It is now. Okay, all right, that's better. Thank you, all of you, for being here. Thank you, Eleanor, for agreeing to moderate what I know is going to be a great discussion among three extraordinary people, one of whom, I hope it's me, but one of whom will be the next Attorney General. We won't talk about the person who periodically doesn't show up to these events, who's not here tonight, but the three women are. On a much more serious note, on a much more serious note, I stand before you as the most qualified, most experienced, most prepared candidate to be the Attorney General of our state that we so desperately need on January 1, to confront all of the challenges that are currently in front of us and the ones that we know are yet to come, and they're coming, because I believe actually as horrific as the times are right now dealing with this man named Donald Trump, I don't believe the worst is behind us. I believe the worst is in front of us. Now more than ever, New Yorkers across the city and across the state need someone to protect, defend, and empower them, and I stand before you as that woman. I am a product of the Buffalo Public Schools, born and reared in a great city called Buffalo. I know for many of you it's like Siberia, but it is part of New York State. I proudly have called Harlem. Harlem has been my home for the past 7 years, and it was actually where my father was born before he was reared in Liberty City, Florida, and then came back to New York State to be one of the greatest public servants this state has ever known or will ever know, as a former Deputy Speaker of the New York State Assembly, who was a champion and the most progressive and prolific legislators the state has ever known. I have more courtroom experience in federal courts across this state, from Western New York, where I practice law, to the Southern District of New York, than any other candidate. My first job out of Harvard Law School, I graduated from Smith and the John F. Kennedy School of Government. My first job out of Harvard Law School was clerking for the first African American to serve a full term on the state's highest court, the Honorable Fritz W. Alexander, who was a former law partner with David Dinkins. The case that I'm most proud of that I handled as a litigation associate, a young litigation associate in Washington, D.C., was a case where I took on the prison system, representing women incarcerated in the District of Columbia prisons against the District of Columbia. One of my clients had her legs shackled to a bed as she brought a child into this world. I am proud to say I stayed the course, I fought hard, and I won. I had the honor of serving as counsel to Joe Biden in the mid-1990s, focused on implementing the Violence Against Women Act, the first Senate counsel to Homeland Security advisor to Hillary Clinton, fighting in the trenches for Hillary, advancing women's rights, reproductive rights, civil rights, fighting against the rollback of them, and more recently serving as the first woman and the first person of color to be the chief economic development advisor of our state. This is not the time for on-the-job training. This is the time to have someone who has the experience, who knows this state, and I'm a daughter of this state, to fight back against the assault from Donald Trump, but also take care of the issues that we have here at home. And it is with great humility and respect that I ask for your consideration and for your vote. I ask you to believe in Eve. Thank you so much.
Tish, your opening statements, please.
So before I begin, just a couple of things. This young gentleman is trying to get her to stop, and I speak really loud, but okay. Thank you. Oh, okay, sorry, thank you. So this young man who's sitting up front, he's the timekeeper, and he was trying to get the candidate to stop, and he was going like this and this and this. And so I just know you're holding signs, and I will follow instructions, but don't take time off from me right now. I came in a little late because I went to, and it's so appropriate, I went to a book signing today by a friend, and the name of the book is called The Revolution is Female. And since we have 3 female candidates here, it's so appropriate that I went to this book signing a few minutes ago. Because the other candidate who's not here, who tends not to wear high heels, he does show up from time to time. And lastly, let me just say, we had a great victory as Democrats last night. Let me just say, Johanna Haynes, who won the congressional primary in Connecticut, she'll be the first black woman elected to Congress from Connecticut. Ilhan Omar won congressional primary in Minnesota, a refugee from Somalia. Then there's Rashida Tlaib. She won a congressional primary in Michigan. She will be a Muslim, the first woman Muslim elected in Congress. And then there's Sharice Davids, who is a Native American and a lesbian who won congressional primary in Kansas. And And then for my LGBT family, there's Lupe Valdez. She won a primary for Texas governor. There was Jared Polis, who's a gay man who won a primary for Colorado in Colorado governor's race. And then there's a bisexual Kate Brown, current governor of Oregon. She's bisexual. And Christine Hallquist, a transgender, won primary for Vermont governor. Yay! So my point is, doesn't really matter who you support in this stage. The bottom line is that a significant number of Democrats came out yesterday and the blue wave is coming. So now, the clock. My name is Letitia James, and I'm a candidate for the office of Attorney General, former public defender, a former assistant attorney general, 10 years working in the state legislature, city council member in the borough of Brooklyn, a faraway place, and the public advocate of the city of New York. We've brought more laws in the public advocate's office. We've re-engineered the office of public advocate. For those who question my independence, I've sued the mayor, who is a friend, an ally, and a supporter at least 10 times. And I've also been fair and honest. I've sued the governor as well, 1, 2, and 3 times. And I've sued our former mayor, Mayor Bloomberg, for the violation of extending the 3rd term. It's also important to know that as the public advocate of the city of New York, I've passed more laws than all previous public advocates combined. And joining with my very good friend, Council Member Helen Rosenthal. And the last bill that we passed was transformative, I believe, groundbreaking. Because I believe equal pay for equal work, and I believe it should be more than just a slogan, and we banned salary history in the city of New York. We've also, with a minimal staff and a low budget, we have negotiated and we have settled over 32,000 constituent complaints, individuals who walk through our doors without high-paid lobbyists and without attorneys. I am running for the office of Attorney General because I'm in this space, this sacred space where civil rights icons have once walked. And what we need now is someone who understands civil rights and understands the importance of standing up and fighting back and taking off an entire country and recognizing that all of our rights are at stake right now. All of our rights, and that the law is the firmest pillar of our democracy. You see, I was trained at Howard University, which was the laboratory for the civil rights struggle, which turned a mirror on America, and which transformed this entire country and outlawed legal segregation. They trained me to be a social engineer. They trained me to fight for justice. They trained me to stand up for individuals who are invisible and locked out of the sunshine of opportunity. And now, since all of us are in the same boat, you need someone who understands that, who recognizes that, and it was trained to do that, which is why I've taken on powerful interests like developers. I've taken on legislators. I've taken on landlords. I've taken on powerful interest in the city of New York because I believe in a good fight. And right now, what we need is someone who understands that you should not be afraid, not be fearful of Donald Trump. We should take him down. We should sue him all the way to bankruptcy. We should investigate his business interests. We should investigate his business holdings. We should investigate whether or not why he was once in debt and now in a position to purchase all of this property. We can do that because I've been trained to do that, and I will do that at the same time knowing the office of Attorney General and its powers and its responsibilities and its duties. My name is Letitia James, and I plan on being the next Attorney General of the state of New York. God bless you and thank you.
And next we have Zephyr Teachout.
Good evening. Here's Zephyr.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Good evening. Thank you so much for moderating. Thank you so much for hosting. And thank you so much for being here. We are in a desperate crisis for the future of this country. We are in a constitutional crisis and a profound moral crisis. Families are getting ripped apart. We cannot trust the federal government. We cannot trust the EPA to protect basic health, air, and water. And we have a president who is openly bigoted, sexist, lawless, daily rips apart the idea of truth and of law and of the sacred promises of our country. There is no more important legal office in the United States than the office of the Attorney General of New York State to combat this very, very serious existential threat. This is because, first, Donald Trump's businesses are here, his foundation is here, and the activity of so many of his associates are here, as well as his own behavior. 3 days after Donald Trump took office, I sued him in the Southern District of New York for violating the Foreign Emoluments Clause of the Constitution and taking foreign government money through his businesses, corrupting our entire presidency. And I built a legal strategy to take on Donald Trump's businesses with the top lawyers in the country, and our legal strategy had an enormous victory last month. A lot of people will tell you that they'll stand up to Donald Trump. I can tell you, I've been pushing a legal strategy that will force him to divest his hotel in DC. And when I'm Attorney General, he'll have to divest his businesses here in New York. What matters so much for this job is deep legal expertise in anti-corruption law, in constitutional law, in the laws that Donald Trump is ripping apart, and second, independence. I'm not just going to talk about Donald Trump, I'm going to talk about New York, because we got some problems here at home. I am ready to use existing powers to investigate corruption in Albany, use existing powers to speak out against, to investigate sexual misconduct in Albany. I'm the only candidate up here who has been standing from before the beginning with every single IDC challenger, because we need to end this corrupt bargain that has held back our state. If you clap, the young man takes away my time. We're going to have a full discussion tonight, but the last thing I want to say is that we have a disease of corruption in the way our campaigns are funded, and I'm the only candidate not to take LLC money, and because of that, I'm ready to take on Wall Street and real estate and big pharma and big fossil fuel companies using that expertise to do it. I can't wait for the discussion tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, the first thing I have to say is I'm excited for New York because of these three women sitting on this stage. And yes, I want this to be a discussion, so feel free to talk together as well as to the audience, okay? So it's not one person having to answer any specific question, okay? So the first question is something that's been looming largely on my mind, and it's a question that we've gotten from the audience. I'm not exactly sure who asked it, but a lot of people have been asking this question, and it has to do with Donald Trump and his pardons. If Donald Trump pardons someone for federal crimes, can we in New York State try them for the same state crime? And what are we going to need to do to make that happen?
I'll speak to that first. If a federal pardon does not apply to state law crimes, New York State has a double jeopardy statute that prohibits prosecution of the exact same crime if there's a federal pardon. So two things. One, in many, many instances, arguably most of the instances where Donald Trump would do a corrupt, self-serving pardon, which would be a genuine constitutional crisis, real constitutional crisis, New York State will be able to prosecute that associate regardless, because I gotta tell you, based on news reports alone, there isn't just one thing they did wrong. No, but I'm very serious about that, and it's really important that we be very clear. I launched my campaign with this, saying, Donald Trump, there is no get-out-of-jail-free card. And that the existing statute will not bar most prosecutions, and we have to be very clear that Donald Trump knows that and knows that no one is above the law. Second, I support, and I've been out front in supporting, I think I was the first one to support, although I think we all support it now, is that we need to close that pardon loophole in New York State, so that if there is a question about the exact same crime, exact same underlying acts is actually the underlying legal premise, then New York State would not be limited, because this is Donald Trump claiming immunity, which he does all the time, the idea that he is a monarch as opposed to part of a democratic society where he's above the law.
So by appointing Justice Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, you would virtually be giving Donald Trump a get out of jail free card, because Mr. Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh, has written and believes that the president is above the law and should not be subject to civil and or criminal prosecution, which is tantamount to getting out a free jail card. So, with respect to the pardon loophole, this is not an academic exercise for me. You see, I am someone who gets things done. And in order to get things done in Albany, you have to understand how Albany works, and you have to have relationships, right? And so we've got to be practical. And I've already had discussions with members of the Assembly and the Senate with regards to the bill that's currently pending in Albany. And I do know the individuals who are blocking the bill and the reasons why. And I've already begun discussions. And so as the next Attorney General, in the first 100 days, that bill will be passed. We've already begun discussions. And there are members of different caucuses in Albany in the Assembly, and when Andrea Stewart Cousins takes over the New York State Senate, we are confident that that bill will be discussed, because the reality is that Manafort in the next 24 hours will be convicted. And I suspect, that there are relationships and business relationships with Manafort and President Trump, or that illegitimate person, or Agent Orange, or whatever you want to refer to him. And because of that, we've got to investigate. So as the next Attorney General, I'm going to have a unit of attorneys and going to deputize members of the private bar. And individuals have already reached out to me from several law firms all throughout the city and the state. And they will primarily be focused on investigating President Trump and his relationships and his business ties. And we also need in Albany to make sure that we pass a number of program bills. And as someone who worked in the office of Attorney General, and I am the only one on this stage who's actually worked in the office and knows how it operates and knows the importance and recognizes that there's a number of issues that we've got to deal with in the state of New York, including corruption, including Donald Trump, including consumer fraud, including criminal prosecutions, including immigration. And as someone who has represented a family, a mother and her child who were separated and who are now united and who are now have been removed from detention, what we need is someone in the office of Attorney General who gets things done.
The short answer to the question is yes and yes. As was mentioned, New York is one of a minority of states that does provide for the ability of the Attorney General, and I, without question, as Attorney General, would aggressively continue the investigation and prosecution of Donald Trump, his cronies, family members, wherever the investigation may lead, for crimes committed under state law that are distinct acts for which those persons may have been convicted under federal law. Because a lot of people don't understand that the president, as powerful as he may be, has the pardon power only with respect to convictions of federal crimes and not state crimes. There is the loophole that two of my opponents have referred to. There are about 20 states in this country whose laws are frankly much better than New York's. I mean, they're a lot better in New York's on criminal justice and voting reform, and we will get to that, 2 issues for which I have a central focus and a long history in terms of fighting. But New York needs to get with the program and close this loophole, which I believe it will do. But let me just say, I started off talking about having more courtroom experience in this state, in federal courts, across the state than any other candidate. The 2 on the stage, as well as the 1 who periodically shows up to these debates. From the Western District of New York to the Southern District of New York. First job out of law school, spending time clerking for, as I mentioned, the first African American to serve a full term, but for 2 years, having discussions with the judges on the state's highest court about the most fundamental legal issues of our time based on the New York State Constitution, New York State statutes, and the federal Constitution. So you are, without question, looking at the person who is best prepared, because of my experience in courts in this state, dealing with our laws, to take on and prosecute under state law Donald Trump or anybody else who has broken the law. He, his daughter, son, whomever may have committed a crime under state law will not be above the law with Leisha Eve as the Attorney General of our great state.
Eleanor, can I just one thing?
Yes, but please keep answers short.
I'll keep it very short. Some of you in the room may be wondering why we haven't already closed this loophole. Many of you may know the answer. We have a Republican veto in Albany and an IDC that has stood with Republicans in Albany. And it's really important, the work that so many of you are doing now to make sure that we have a true blue Democratic Senate so that we aren't stopped from confronting this constitutional crisis.
All right. The next question, and please keep your answers short. Please address in specific terms how you would use the powers of your office to address the NYCHA atrocities.
Okay. The question
please
is...
address in specific terms how you would use your powers of your office to address the NYCHA atrocities.
So let me just say that I've been in the forefront of any of the candidates with respect to NYCHA, which is public housing. There are over 600,000 residents in the city of New York who are living in public housing. As a former member of the city council who represented a significant number of residents in public housing, it is something that I fight for each and every day, because these individuals supported me, these individuals, I've been to their humble homes, these individuals are hardworking individuals, and the vast majority of them are women with children. And so it's really critically important that we address the lead, and as right now I am part of a lawsuit where we are settling and we are negotiating with the federal courts to bring some redress to the residents of public housing. In addition to that, we filed a lawsuit in the Office of Public Advocate when residents in public housing were denied heat. We were successful in winning that against the administration. We have also spoke about NYCHA with respect to all of the development that is happening on their underutilized land, and we've opposed quite a bit along with my very good friend, Councilmember Rosenthal. The residents of public housing have been ignored for far too long. They are mostly invisible, and the residents of public housing need the attention and the focus that I have brought in the Office of Public Advocate, and that I will continue to bring in the Office of Attorney General. But it's important that we all understand that I have been to Buffalo where there's lead poisoning. I've been to Albany where 8 African-American men have been murdered. I've been to Hudson where immigrants unfortunately don't have housing. I've been to Long Island where they're dumping in communities of color, and we need to talk about environmental justice. As someone who has led the way on NYCHA, the pension board, to divest from fossil fuels, to divest from gun retailers, to divest from hedge funds. Again, this is not an academic exercise for me. I'm not in an ivory tower. I'm on the ground, in the street, getting things done. Thank you.
You've heard a lot of discussion about Donald Trump And I so appreciate the question because as important as it is to fight back against all that he is doing to undermine so many of our rights and our values, what is happening in NYCHA and in public housing across this state, from New York City to Central and Western New York, where I was born and reared, underscores the fact that we in this state have not taken care of business to the extent that we must. The two most fundamental things that we all want are a safe home and a fair shot at life for our children. New York should be able to provide that. And in thousands and thousands and thousands of instances across this city, including the challenged neighborhood that I have proudly called home for 7 years, and in neighborhoods across the state, that's not happening. And that is why I'm going to be the Attorney General that makes real what the state's highest court said many years ago, and that is every single child in our state, no matter what their circumstances, is entitled to a sound, basic, quality education. And the state's highest court that I work for made a determination that is not happening.
Okay, the question's about NYCHA housing.
I stand before, well, the NYCHA housing is important because it's a reflection of lack of opportunity. We talk about lead paint. I am the daughter of the author of New York's lead paint law. So this is the exact opposite of an academic exercise for me. As Attorney General, there will be no more fierce, aggressive enforcer of the law that my father authored.
The NYCHA crisis is a housing crisis, an environmental crisis, and a cover-up crisis. And all three have to be investigated. Environmental justice is at the core of my platform. And it is not an accident that so many of the worst environmental disasters, the public health disasters, asthma, lead paint, PFOS, are all ones that are the special burden is taken on by communities of color. So there's a range of tools, civil and criminal, to investigate and hold accountable those involved in the NYCHA crisis, and I think it's critically important we hold those involved in the cover-up accountable as well. I mentioned at the beginning that I don't take corporate PAC money, I don't take LLC money. That means I am not taking money from the big developers in this city. And I will not hesitate to make a top priority investigating the illegal behavior in some of the fanciest developments: tax fraud, money laundering, and then the tenant harassment, pushing people out. So the housing crisis is broad and has many, many different roots. The tools that I will use are civil and criminal, and the tool of independence. Thank you.
All right, this is a question from Naftali Moster. New York City's mayor has been investigating yeshivas for more than 3 years because many of them are not providing a substantially equivalent education as required by law. Will you hold government officials like the mayor accountable, and how as Attorney General?
So I think it's important that everyone understand the role of Attorney General. The Attorney General is not a super DA. The criminal prosecution is very limited and very circumscribed under the law. And so I don't want individuals to walk away that you've got all of this power. People need to understand the role of Attorney General and the laws in the state of New York. And the Office of Attorney General, 60% of what they do is state's counsel work. You represent state agencies. 20% is affirmative litigation, pattern and practice cases. There's enforcement, and then there's advocacy. There's only about 5 statutes where you have the ability to prosecute individuals. And in order to prosecute corruption, you have to first focus on civil, and you can perhaps investigate criminal. But I think it's important that we not engage in false information tonight, and that we understand the law. Now, with respect to yeshivas, the issue has gotten a lot of attention here in the city of New York. And what we really need to do is investigate yeshivas to determine whether or not the individuals are being adequately educated, or whether or not they're taking public funds for other purposes, whether they're engaging in proselytizing, or whether they're engaging in further information of our religious pursuits. And that's an important issue. And so the complaint will be filed in the Office of Attorney General, and the Office of Attorney General has the obligation and duty to investigate it under executive law. And as you know, the office's investigatory responsibilities are wide and vast. And lastly, let me just say that the only individual on this stage that's actually taken a major developer all the way to the United States Supreme Court and almost bankrupted him is Letitia James, who took a developer to build a basketball arena for the worst team in the NBA and engaged in foreclosing upon homes. And I'll always remember, as a city council member who looked in the eyes of someone who was a Holocaust survivor.
This question was about the yeshivas.
So it's about yeshivas and about a Holocaust survivor. And that Holocaust survivor said, Tish, stand up and fight back. We'll fight back and make sure the yeshivas are educating individuals, and we're going to fight back against abuses of developers in the city of New York and in the state of New York, and we're going to continue to stand up against corruption in the state of New York. And as the next Attorney General, as someone who knows the office and recognizes the power and the limitations of the office, I look forward to serving all of you.
I believe the question was, would I investigate if Attorney Generals seek to hold accountable?
Yes. Would you continue investigating and looking at whether they're providing substantially equivalent education as required by law? And would you hold the mayor and other officials accountable? And how would you do it as Attorney General within your purview?
A matter being brought to the Attorney General on so fundamental an issue, yes, I would investigate. And to the point that was made earlier by one of my opponents, the Office of the Attorney General, the powers are incredibly broad. Education historically is not an area that you've heard Attorney Generals speak about in the past. But as I mentioned, the state's highest court has talked about, based upon our state constitution, every single child, whether you're in a yeshiva or not, is entitled, legally entitled, I would argue morally entitled, but we're talking about the Attorney General's lyrics, legally entitled to a sound basic education. And whether there is specific authority for the Attorney General to investigate that issue or not, the state's highest court has said that they have a constitutional right to this. And so the answer from me is a resounding yes. If someone brings to my attention, my office's attention, that children in their community are not getting, in their view, a sound basic education to which they are constitutionally entitled to receive, yes, I would investigate and take that investigation where it leads.
Yes, I would investigate, and yes, I would investigate and hold the mayor accountable and hold those that are allowing this to happen accountable. We owe every child in this state. We owe a sound basic education. This is, as others have mentioned, a constitutional obligation. And I've been very disturbed by the legislative as well, the legislative efforts to undermine that as well. I started my career not as a lawyer, before as a lawyer, as a special ed teacher's aide in a classroom. Education is really important to me. And I gotta say, since we're here, that there's been no greater champion for every child in New York State getting the education they deserve than Robert Jackson. There's a lot of money flowing into education policy right now, and there are roles for the Attorney General to play. One of the areas that's really important is child privacy. We have big tech companies that in some instances may be using children's data in different ways. As Attorney General, I want to launch an investigation into that because our schools should not be used by for-profit big tech companies.
Okay, again, this is about the yeshivas.
Okay. So the answer on the yeshivas is absolutely yes. Thank you.
Just trying to keep you guys on topic. I know you're all politicians here and you're trying to get your points in, but I'm trying to do my job. So I'm just going to ask some questions of a little bit lighter fare, and there's no need to stand up for these questions, for these answers, and they should be short because they should just be some names. All right. I want to hear from each of you who your 3 role models are.
3?
Yeah, you get 3, and they can be past, present.
I'll tell you 3. Shirley Chisholm, Elizabeth Warren, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Shirley Chisholm, whose chief of staff we just buried today. May he rest in peace. He was the head of a major event in Brooklyn, and is also, we're trying to get a museum named after Shirley Chisholm and a statue in New York City because women are underrepresented. Eleanor Holmes Norton, and Barbara Jordan. And Barbara Jordan, as most of you know, was the first black woman to make a major speech before any Democratic convention. And I too want to salute Robert Jackson, who was the plaintiff in the
And it was just supposed to be named.
Campaign for Fiscal Equity.
My father, who is the greatest public servant I've ever known. As a freshman, member of the assembly, not the party-endorsed candidate, freshman, authored legislation that became the law of this state, creating the EOP and the HEOP program, through which more than 100,000 New Yorkers have gone to college who otherwise might not have been able to go.
I'm just taking a point of personal privilege here. It is now known as the Arthur O. Eve HEOP EOP program.
Equally significant in terms of role models, but less well known, is my mother, who is the person who brought me into this world, raised my 4 brothers and me, and taught English for 33 years, and in her retirement founded what became the largest and most comprehensive alternatives to incarceration for women in the state of New York and the state's history. And the last group, it's hard to pin a name, so I would put in a group so many unsung women whose names we will never know, but who sacrificed a lot for us to be on this stage.
Thank you. Now, since Zephyr, you actually followed directions, if you'd like to say anything about any of your role models, you are welcome to at this point.
I just want to mention I don't take LLC money.
All right. So now back to back to brass tacks. What specific investigations into corruption in Albany that are ongoing currently would you continue?
I would continue all of them. And you know, it's funny, but it's sad. that this state is the home of the suffrage movement. It's the home of the environmental movement. It's the home of the LGBT rights movement. It has a history of being one of the most progressive states in the nation's history, and we are the poster child for corruption in the United States of America. So I would continue every investigation that is underway, and unfortunately, there are probably more yet to come. I was asked at a tech forum last night a question that is pertinent to the question that was just posed. And the question was, what critique do you have of the governor? And I will tell you, the governor didn't endorse me. He endorsed one of my opponents, but I'm going to vote for him. But my critique of him was that it was wrong for him to shut down the Moreland Commission. I said it was a mistake, and I think I went on to say it was a big mistake. We have so many people across this state who are so disgusted with politics, and that makes me so upset because I know what good public servants can do. I know what good public servants do. Yes, my parents, Robert Jackson, so many people in this room. And the few bad apples who are corrupt give public servants a bad name at a time when we need our best and our brightest going into public service as opposed to doing something else. So I would continue every investigation.
What she didn't mention was I worked for her father, and I think it's important that everyone understand what she left out of his bio, and that is he marched into Attica prison during the uprising. And for that, he will always be a hero in my heart. So another round of applause to Arthur O'Eve. Read the book. I entered into public service because public service did a lot for my life. You see, my parents, my mother scrubbed floors and my father was a maintenance man. I come from humble beginnings. And my brother was arrested at a young age, and my mother took me to court, and I was around 9 or 10. And I'll always remember marching into court in Brooklyn, and I'll always remember everybody in the courtroom didn't look like me except for the defendants. And I remember the court officers telling my mother, sit down, shut up, we'll get to you later. It was that point in time I decided to commit my life to justice and to go to law school, because it was important that no mother, no grandmother, nobody, no grandfather ever be disrespected. And that is part of my DNA and who I am, is to fight for justice. Yes, Governor Cuomo has supported me, but he was wrong to shut down Moreland. And so what we should do when we get to Albany, when I get to Albany, is do the following. We should investigate public benefit corporations. There are too many public benefit corporations in the state of New York under so many different state statutes. And the Empire State Development, which is the development that I sued for that basketball arena for the worst team in the NBA, but I digress. There's a lot of development in that authority. There's hundreds of public benefit corporations that have no transparency, that have no oversight, and have no checks and balances. And they need to be investigated. We also need to investigate and continue Buffalo Billions. We also need to investigate all of the pending cases, and of course we don't know. We're not in the office as of yet. Well, I'm not there yet. And what we need to do is continue to investigate them. We also need to make sure that we use the Moreland Act, we use the Donnelly Act, we use executive law, we use the civil law, we use all the laws that are available in the office of the Attorney General to investigate corruption wherever we find it. We also need to look at election law. We need to make sure that Jacob, and just asking for someone to step down to me is not enough. We need to reform Jacob and make sure that it's independent. We need to make sure that we respect Ms. Sugarman and give her powers, the powers that were just removed just the other day, that were just done that was part of an agreement from the Moreland Commission. And so all of you have said, oh, well, Tish, you're supported by the governor. But right before I was supported by the governor, when I was the public advocate, everybody wanted Tish James. They wanted Tish James at every rally. They wanted Tish James at every lawsuit, involved in every lawsuit, as I am now. They wanted Tish James to speak out on everything. And they never questioned my independence, because as a woman of color, and for 20 years of public service, I got here the hard way. I worked my way here, and I've never been at the table and never been a part of the power structure. and I never will be, and which is why I am fearless and will stand up to anyone, including the governor of the state of New York, even if he endorsed me. Thank you.
The corruption we have in New York State is hurting people, causing so much suffering, and causing so much of the inequality that we have in this state. Just for one example, the Buffalo Billion trial this summer was about $750 million of state money, of public money, that was supposed to go to desperately needed economic development. So I was just in Utica. I delivered Donald Trump a copy of, or tried to deliver Donald Trump a copy of my book, Corruption in America. But I was just in Utica, and Utica family of four makes $30,000 a year. I talked to families in Utica who were desperate for that economic development money. You know where that money went? That went to big donors, that went to LLC donors, to be precise. So the waste and cost and pain from the corruption in this state is incredible. Now, it has not traditionally been the role of the New York State Attorney General to make public corruption a priority. Should be clear about that. After the Moreland Commission was shut down in a press conference by Andrew Cuomo, he forgot something. I've been outspoken about the Moreland Commission since the beginning, about the shutdown. But he forgot something. He forgot to actually formally rescind the powers that he had granted to the Attorney General to investigate corruption in New York. I wrote a public letter, this is in 2014, to Eric Schneiderman saying, use those powers. We need to investigate now, and I am ready right now to use those powers, and if Andrew Cuomo wants to have a fight with me about whether those powers still exist, let's have that fight. Because we need to... we need to continue investigations, but they're investigations that we have too long said it's the Southern District of New York's job. It has to be the Attorney General of New York's job to ensure the integrity of our own state. We should be investigating the IDC taking illegal money and continuing to use it and holding on to it. Despite a court decision that that's illegal. And Leisha Eve and I are the only two who have called for the IDC members to return that money. I'm just getting started and I got a stop sign. Thank you.
All right. Now, charter schools have dominated politics by using hedge funds to influence candidates and votes, putting public schools at a disadvantage. What would you do to use your office to level the playing field, or I'm not even sure what your office could actually do in regards to the charter school movement?
I've already brought a lawsuit against Success Academy. So the question is not what will you do, but what have you done?
Well, no, actually, it's what can you do
do?
as Attorney General?
Let me get to that.
Not what you have done,
So
but what can you do?
in the Public Advocate's Office, we sued Success Academy and Eva Moskowitz individually. Why do you say? Because she was discriminating against disabled children, because she was not allowed, if you look at the roles, what they do is not allow individuals, they don't enroll individuals who are special needs children.
As Attorney General, what would you do?
Right, exactly. So discrimination is something in the Office of Attorney General as part of the Civil Rights Bureau. You have a Civil Rights Bureau, and as someone who worked with the Civil Rights Bureau to investigate stop and frisk abuses, we all remember the report and the recommendations. I was one of the assistants who was part of that. And the Civil Rights Bureau is responsible for enforcing discrimination laws in the state of New York. So the Success Academy has a pattern and practice of unfortunately not enrolling special needs children, English language learners, and disabled children. And what they do is they leave those children behind in failing public schools. I've seen it in Brooklyn, and I've seen it all over the city of New York. And so the Office of Attorney General has a duty and a responsibility to investigate that discrimination as part of the Civil Rights Bureau of the state of New York, and as someone who is responsible for enforcing the laws and knows the Civil Rights Bureau and knows its discrimination laws, which we have used frequently. We used it against worst landlords because, as you know, in the Public Advocate's Office, we have turbocharged worst landlords, and we've gone against a number of landlords up here in the Upper West Side, and we'll continue to do that as the next Attorney General.
This is important to understand. I've been outspoken about the privatization of public education, but in terms of the particular roles of the Attorney General, one of the big problems with charter schools is the degree to which they're a black box and the things that we don't know. Very concerned about what's under that box. I was trying to explain to a 8-year-old the other day what subpoena power was. We got there. Lasso of truth. None of you have watched Wonder Woman recently? No, but there's an important investigative powers, and particularly as regards to discrimination in the charter schools, and various forms of violations of state law in terms of our violating our own anti-discrimination civil rights laws in the state. The other part of understanding how we can address the privatization of public education has to do with hedge fund managers and their role in New York politics in general. So I see 3 main areas that most of the job is a legal job, but 3 main areas that I want to use my platform to say, this is an area where the Attorney General can lead, even where there may not be the legal, there's some but limited legal authority. One is voting rights. One is mass incarceration, and I know Eleanor's like,
Yeah, when we're talking about charter schools here.
no, but the third is the area where this is relevant, which is really leading on and being the lead advocate for campaign finance reform, for closing the LLC loophole, because hedge fund managers are a huge part of the driver of the privatization of our education system. The amount of money is huge. In fact, one of those hedge fund managers spent $500,000 against me recently. In part because of my outspoken nature about the dangers of privatization and charterization in our state.
First, let me say, I have not received any hedge fund money, nor have I received, has my campaign received resources from any charter school or charter school organization. And I say that because I'm not going to stand in front of you and say all charter schools are bad. I talked about being the beneficiary of a quality public school education in Buffalo, and knowing that my experience was the exception rather than being the rule. The last thing that I'm going to tell a parent whose child is in a failing school because our government did not do its job is to tell that parent that they have no other option for their child. I am not going to do that, because I don't think you would want anybody to say that to you if your child was in a failing school. So I can't speak to hedge funds. I'm not part of that world. They're not part of my campaign. I have seen good charter schools, and I've seen bad ones. I've seen charter schools in parts of upstate New York. Hedge funds aren't anywhere near them. They're charter schools that were started by faith-based organizations with very limited resources, but they were started because the public school system is not doing justice to the children in that community. But as it relates to discrimination that may be taking place in charter schools or, in fact, in public schools, yes, under the Civil Rights Bureau, there is explicit authority for the Attorney General, and as Attorney General, I would conduct an investigation and commence litigation if that's where the investigation led. But to the extent charter schools are not for-profit entities, in some cases they are, but in many cases they are not. In many cases they are non-profit entities. There is broad authority under the Office of Attorney General as the person who oversees all nonprofit charitable entities in the state of New York, regardless of the type of service they provide. There is broad power to investigate charter schools, particularly if they are nonprofit, to make sure that the mission of the organization serving children is in fact being served in an appropriate way.
And I guess under the Charities Bureau, the AG's office can look into the use of for-profit management companies within the charter schools.
Yes.
And is that something that, as AGs, you would all look into?
So let me just say that the Charities Bureau, for the most part, is ministerial in nature. There are certain powers on the Charities Bureau, but for the purposes of investigating a charter school, it would primarily be in the Civil Rights Bureau to investigate violations of human rights laws in the state of New York, because we all know that, Brown versus Board of Education and the forerunner to that, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, was all about the notion of separate and unequal, and charter schools are basically separate and unfortunately unequal. And we all know that they divert significant amount of funds from public schools. And we all know that most of them are not unionized, and I'm a big supporter and proponent of the labor movement, which is why every union in the state of New York has endorsed Letitia James. And so it's really critically important that we understand that we can use consumer fraud, we can use the Charities Bureau, we can use deceptive business practices, we can use the False Claims Act. You can use a number of laws on the books to investigate, particularly Success Academy, because of what they do and the egregious nature of their behavior. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is we need to know the facts, that these are broad areas of jurisdiction. And if you're going to let me, there is something that I've spoken out about the Charities Bureau that I think is quite important. You may know that Barbara Underwood recently, Barbara Underwood is a total powerhouse. And she can have any job she wants when I'm AG. But she just brought a real powerhouse lawsuit against Donald Trump's foundation. And using the civil authority she has, but she doesn't have freestanding criminal authority. And I'm actually really proud of my role, even as a candidate, in shaping what's happening with this Trump investigation. I called repeatedly on Andrew Cuomo to say that he would provide criminal authority so she could also criminally investigate and use that tool as she sees fit what's happening with Donald Trump's foundation. And he, after pounding the table, he said that he would do so. And if you read any of the articles about it, it does credit my insistence that this was necessary. And then that also led to the tax department announcing that it was going to start investigating Donald Trump's taxes. So the broader point here is that, that especially when we deal with the Charities Bureau, it is a missing tool. And it may not be a tool that needs to be used in every instance, but when you see rising numbers of charities being used in fraudulent ways, it's really important to have that tool in the Attorney General's office. And so the actual authority that I called for was a broad referral, not specific to this case, to be able to criminally investigate along with civil investigations and violations of the violations of laws in the Charities Bureau.
And to answer your question, it was mentioned that the office is ministerial. The fact that Barbara Underwood did what she did underscores that you need an attorney general who knows how to be a creative lawyer. She's a creative lawyer. Yes, the Charities Bureau primarily is ministerial, but she didn't kind of take that as a stopping point. She used her creative intellectual firepower and said, how can I use this authority to hold the Donald Trump Foundation accountable? And so I too applaud her efforts and would continue them if I were elected Attorney General. And because I know you want us to focus on facts, I did want to correct inaccurate statement that you made. It may have, I assume, been unintentional, but you are no longer the only candidate to have labor support in this race. I am proud to have the endorsement of more than 4,000, almost all women, who are healthcare workers in this state, CWA Local 1168 from the great city of Buffalo. Thank you.
Okay, we have 6
I'll give you
minutes.
Buffalo.
We have 6 minutes left before we have to go to our closing remarks from each of you. I mean, this time has gone by extremely fast, so I want to get at least one environmental question in. The Environmental Division has made news through its investigation of Exxon, but that hasn't actually caused much change. How would you use the powers of the office to combat pollution and climate change? And let's start with Tish.
Oh, okay, good.
Because Zephyr's trying too hard to stand up first.
No, I keep on my desk the pictures of two children who died from asthma attacks. One was 10 and the other one was 12. They live in downtown Brooklyn. Because when I was a city council member, when it brought an action against one of the developers, or actually brought to the attention of the administration that we were in violation of the Clean Air Act in downtown Brooklyn because we were testing the air. And so these two children died because they didn't have nebulizers. They were too poor. And unfortunately, their mothers didn't get, they didn't have Medicaid. So that's a constant reminder when I look at their faces on my desk of the environmental threats. And we all know that environmental justice is a real issue. Earlier I talked about in Brentwood and in Buffalo, lead poisoning in Buffalo, illegal dumping in Brentwood. Here in the city of New York, NYCHA, some of these dollar stores and 99-cent stores that are proliferated in communities of color all have toxic toys that they unfortunately sell to children. So as the next Attorney General of the state of New York, we will use the full power of environmental laws and there's criminal sanctions in that particular statute to go after some of these violators. We also need to focus on individuals who engage in fracking infrastructure, which continues to exist upstate, and there are a number of individuals who are very much concerned about that. Fossil fuels, I led the way in the city of New York to divest from fossil fuels, our pension board, and as the next Attorney General, I will use my advocacy responsibility to convince our controller, Tom DiNapoli, to divest on a state level from fossil fuels. That's what's critically important. And as the Attorney General right now, it's all about federalism. It's all about states' rights. It's all about joining with the coalition of Democratic Attorney Generals all across this nation as I've reached out to them. Oh, we've got a red light. Okay, that's what I'm gonna do, trust me. Can I be excused? Because I have to go to the ladies' room. I'll be right back.
I think, by the way, that Robert Jackson is in the house now. And I will answer your question, but I just got amazing news that he endorsed me tonight. So I got a lot to say on this question, and the young man up front is going to keep me to a couple minutes. So, one, you ain't seen nothing yet in terms of the litigation that we can bring to stop the horrific health problems that are coming from big polluters, big fossil fuel companies. One, so in terms of the ongoing Exxon lawsuit, I will absolutely continue that. That is under actually our state's financial laws, but there's other laws that we can use. The little mighty state of Rhode Island brought a major fossil fuel lawsuit just about a month ago saying you big fossil fuel companies are causing climate change. which are costing us money and hurting our health in Rhode Island. Well, New York State should be doing a parallel lawsuit because of Sandy and Irene and the incredible costs that come from the weather that we have because of climate change, and nobody can deny those facts anymore. Second, and Robert Jackson knows something about standing up against power, it's actually going to take standing up and disagreeing publicly with the governor to be able to use the full powers of our law. In Newburgh, the Department of Defense has poisoned the city of Newburgh with PFOS. But in order to hold the Department of Defense accountable, the Attorney General's office, which can do it with a referral, needs a referral from the governor, needs a referral from the DEC. I have publicly called on the governor to give that referral so that we can finally make sure that the Department of Defense pays for the harm that it caused. Environmental justice will be at the heart of what I do. The New York Attorney General should be intervening and making sure all New Yorkers' voices are heard in FERC decisions. Because the FERC, this federal agency, just rubber stamps pipeline and infrastructure decisions. I am so proud of the work that I did with so many of you, with incredible lawyering and incredible organizing to get to a fracking ban in New York. Thank you very much.
Our state's constitution doesn't have very many lines about the Office of Attorney General. But the singular most significant sentence as it relates to this office says, it is a responsibility of the Attorney General of the state of New York to protect its citizens, it uses that word, but more broadly, its organizations, and its natural resources. Those are the words in our state constitution. Neither one of my opponents have mentioned it yet, but in addition to dealing with bad actors in the state, we've got the bad actor in Washington who has been relentless in trying to roll back the progress that was made under the Obama administration with respect to the Clean Water Act. I will aggressively continue the litigation to fight against the assault and the undermining of that federal law. There's been no mention of the efforts to roll back the Clean Air Act. We've got someone who is head of the EPA who can't seem to find a way to more quickly help companies across this state and across this country pollute our environment. We have to fight back harder than we ever have before against the assault and the efforts to undermine our federal environmental laws while we continue to deal with the issues of environmental justice right here at home. And to answer your question, Eleanor, yes, without question, I would continue the very aggressive investigation that Attorney General Barbara Underwood has undertaken with respect to Exxon, and we'll take that investigation to litigation wherever that investigation may lead.
Thank you all very much. I want to recognize, even though he already has been recognized, Robert Jackson, a candidate for New York State Senate, and New York City Council member Helen Rosenthal, who's up here in front. Thank you both for being here. And now we're going to do some closing statements. We're going to start in the opposite order that we're going to finish with the opposite order that we started in. We'll start with Zephyr.
Okay. Thank you all so much for being here, for listening, for your questions, for voting, for agitating, for organizing. We've talked about a lot of different issues tonight, but I do want to return to this basic crisis moment that we're in. I mean, we're basically in a fight for the possibility of this radical promise of law in this country, the idea that whoever you are, the same rules apply. The idea that big donors don't get special treatment, and you don't get special treatment if you're the President of the United States. And as I said at the beginning, but I really need to emphasize this office is so essential as a legal office and a legal bulwark, both defending against the incredible threats of the Trump administration and Donald Trump, but also aggressively using law as a sword to show what law looks like in this state and in this country. That means, one, suing Donald Trump to make him divest his businesses, investigating his businesses, being ready if he pardons, but also stepping up and doing creative lawsuits here in New York State because the EPA can't be trusted, stepping up and being the sheriff of Wall Street here in New York State because the federal government is rolling back Dodd-Frank, and the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau is run by somebody who doesn't believe in consumers or protection. But that also means, and I have a career of fighting corruption. I know these laws. I sued Donald Trump 3 days after he took office, and I have been deeply engaged in these long-term strategic litigation. It also means that we got to deal with our problem at home. We got to clean house at home. We got to investigate corruption in Albany. We got to make sure there are sexual misconduct, Me Too hearings in Albany, so you hear the stories of the women whose voices have been silenced in our own government. We not only need to make sure we get rid of the IDC, we got to make sure they follow the law. And in my job as Attorney General, I will be tenacious, creative, going after persistent corporate fraud in big real estate in New York, in big fossil fuel companies, in big pharma, whose prices are killing people and who is literally killing people with their deceptive practices. And I will be a voice, basically the wrong people are in jail right now. I will be a voice against mass incarceration, against cash bail, for discovery reform, for ending mass incarceration and reducing our prison and jail population so that we no longer have to be ashamed of the way that we treat people in this state. And I can do this without fear or favor because I don't take corporate money and I'm a true blue Democrat, but I'm totally independent. When I'm Attorney General, you know I will answer to only 3 things: the people of New York State, my conscience, and the law.
Tish, Leisha.
I mentioned when I first spoke about the case that I was most proud of in the 28 years that I've been a lawyer since graduating from Harvard Law School, and it was when I represented hundreds of women incarcerated in District of Columbia prisons. I wasn't even 30 years old when I spent time in women prisons across the Washington, D.C. area, talking to my clients who gave birth with legs shackled to a bed, talking to clients who felt that they had no choice but to engage in sexual intercourse with prison guards so they could have a guarantee that they could see their children. That is the kind of fighter that I was as a baby lawyer. That is the kind of fighter I will be as your Attorney General. After I represented these women, I worked with the author, Joe Biden, of the Violence Against Women Act. He crafted that law with so many organizations. Probably many of you worked to make that law embodied in the law of our land. It was my job to make that law a reality by working with hundreds of organizations who are on the front lines each and every day supporting survivors of domestic violence and physical assault. There is no candidate with more experience in the trenches supporting the good work to support survivors of domestic violence and assault than I, and there will be no more aggressive investigator and prosecutor of state actors, government, taxpayer-funded employees who engage in sexual assault. Our voting reforms are critically important. When I was counsel to Hillary, I crafted the Crown Every Vote Act. It had felon reenfranchisement for the nation, election day registration for the nation, early voting for the nation, no excuse absentee balloting for the nation. The New York Times not only talked about this legislation, it editorialized it as the gold standard for election reform that should stand the test of time and be the law of our nation. And as Attorney General, I will focus on, yes, fighting against the assault of Donald Trump, but as a daughter of this state, I will work every waking moment to make our criminal justice system more fair. Yes, the public advocate mentioned my father. I was 7 years old. My two youngest brothers, named after Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, both of whom my father knew, went into that prison when I was 7, not knowing whether he would come out. That is what I am made of. That is the kind of independence, the kind of fierceness that is in my being. So with that, I ask for your consideration and for your support. I ask you to believe in Eve and for your vote as your next Attorney General. Thank you so much for all that you do.
They usually call me last because they call me the closer. We are at a pivotal time in our history when our rights are under attack, when our values as a country and as Americans are under attack. And this is not the time to be electing into an office individuals who do not have a record of getting things done. 20 years of service, 20 years of getting things done. And right after the president was elected, we filed amicus briefs in the Muslim ban 1, Muslim ban 2, Muslim ban 3. We filed briefs in the case of Ravi Akbar, the individual, the activist who they wanted to deport. We stood with him, we rallied with him. We stood with the LGBT community against the military ban. We filed a case against the Trump administration with respect to that, and with respect to the ban on transgender individuals who wanted to use a bathroom based on their sexual identity. No, we weren't just involved in one case. We've been involved in cases from day one until this day, cases with the ACLU standing up on behalf of those children who have been separated. And I represented one of those children myself. And I represented a DACA child because dreamers must dream too. A child who came to this country from Honduras, whose parents were murdered in Honduras, seeking political asylum. And I was able to get his asylum granted. He came to my office last week. He graduated from high school and introduced me to his girlfriend. But he's doing well in Brooklyn. The point is that we need a fighter. We need someone who knows the law. We need someone who is practical, and we need someone who's going to stand up against the NRA, which is nothing more than a criminal enterprise, and not flip-flop on the Safety Act in the state of New York, taking two different positions depending upon what office you're running for. So we need to be consistent. And we also need to stand up for individuals in the state of New York and recognize the law is a shield and a sword. And that understand that we are all in the same boat now. And now more than ever, we need a champion who's going to speak strong and proud against discrimination and not waver and not have to wait and to consult with individuals and then come out and say discrimination is wrong. We need someone with a strong constitution, someone who knows about fight because it's part of her DNA and because she was trained by the best. And she was trained to be a civil rights lawyer. and she was trained to stand up to the indivisible and to all of you in this room. And wouldn't it be great if after on September 14th, when the president turns on his television, after refusing to denounce white supremacists, those white nationalists, wouldn't it be great if he sees my face as the next Attorney General of the state of New York? Thank you so much.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out this evening. I want to thank our timekeepers. They did an amazing job. And I also want to just say what an amazing group of women we have right here. I think we are so blessed to have women like this running for office, and it's something we're seeing across the nation now. And, you know, if one thing good has come out of a president like we have, is that we have gotten the motivation of so many amazing candidates to come forward. And I think I am turning over the microphone to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Camille Davis with Indivisible Harlem, and I have the pleasure of expressing the gratitude of the group for the many people that have helped bring this event together. So please, if you could hang out for just a few moments, we'd also like to ask Ms. Rosenthal and also Robert Jackson to speak a few words, so just nobody take off. But I do want to thank some people. First, the congregation, Ben Ray, Joshram, for this beautiful space to allow us to meet. Our outstanding moderator, Eleanor Tatum. I promise to stay on topic and within the time frame. Our lead coordinator for the evening, Ellen Landsberger, she's just been wonderful. Our wonderful, wonderful Attorney General candidates, Letitia James, Zephyr Teachout, and I want to make sure, Leecia, I want to say it correctly, Eve. Thank you so much, ladies. We're excited to have you as candidates. Indivisible Harlem members and our volunteers and our co-sponsors, Indivisible, We Stand, Upper West Side, Action Potluck, West Harlem Progressive Democrats, Inwood Indivisible, and Uptown Community Democrats. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Last and not least, I want to thank the attendees. Take a moment to look around the room, even the few empty seats where people have kind of had to wander off. Because if you've been to any marches lately, the way I have, one of the favorite things that we say is, this is what democracy looks like, okay? This is what democracy looks like. People coming out, educating themselves that they are educated voters. I'll ask three things: vote, vote, vote. September 13th, November 6th, we've got to vote. Thank you so much. And now, if we could have, I think Helen Rosenthal wanted to say a word, and then Robert Jackson. Thank you, everyone.
Congratulations. This has been amazing. Is this working? Yes. It is? Oh, great. I just really wanted to thank everyone for being here, and of course, everyone who pulled this together. You know, the Upper West Side is known for people who engage in government, and this is what it looks like. Noteworthy that there are 3 women running
candidates that are running for the Attorney General of New York. I listened in the back for about the last 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I'm very proud that all three of you are running, and obviously I wish that all three of you could be the Attorney General. But what it shows is that you truly believe in the democratic process and running to have the heart and stamina and will to run to make sure that we have an Attorney General that's going to deal with all of the issues and concerns that impact us. I don't need to tell you what they are. You talked about it. And Eleanor, thank you for moderating this forum tonight. And all of the clubs and groups that have come together to bring about this, in my opinion, a very good, appropriate discussion on the issues. And you hear from each one of the candidates, and that's the most important thing. And as the individual from Harlem Indivisible said, this is democracy in action. Give yourself a hand. Thank you, everyone.